Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
Hello.
Hey!
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
What are we talking about this week?
We're talking about, as your main topic, the only thing under the part of our notes it says, everything old is new again.
Everything old is new again. We're talking about an event that happened in West Virginia in the 70s. It's colloquially referred to as textbook wars of Kanawha County, West Virginia. But before we get there, as we were putting together the research for this story, I'm just like, have we learned anything in 50 years of civil rights activism, of education policy?
No. Keep asking. No.
Of media? No. But this story just has everything. It's a microcosm of why we are where we are now.
True.
And how we got to be who we are, I think, in America. But yeah, okay. So any announcements, anything you want to mention before we get into the main story?
Well, the government still isn't working, and they just cut all of the special ed funding, so maybe we shouldn't just go with that right off the rip.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Maybe we should just get on into it then. I want to remind you, go ahead and sign up for the 16 to 1 podcast email newsletter. You'll get the latest updates, episode announcements, resources, workshop offerings from Moonbeam Multimedia. That is us. And if there's a story in your local educational community that you think we should cover, we would love to hear about it. Please contact us using our website or write at hello@16to1.com.
Well, why don't I take you way back this time?
Okay, yeah, how about you do that? Let's set the stage.
Let's talk about the beginning of our neighbors.
To the what? Southwest. Southwest.
That'll do.
The Southeast.
Let's not MapQuest that. Okay. The founding West Virginia starts with the frontier residents who first pushed west the borders of the existing colony of Virginia as they grew more and more culturally and economically distinct from those typically more wealthy, sometimes slaveholding folks in the East.
We're talking about the Appalachian region.
Yes. So, interestingly enough, though, West Virginia in some important ways divided itself during the Civil War. It was officially formed when it seceded from the Confederacy after a majority of Virginia voters approved secession from the U.S. in 1861. Many delegates in the western part of the state believed that the secession vote to be a coup. After several convenings in Wheeling, West Virginia, voters in 1862 approved a state constitution, and the U.S. Congress approved of their entry as a state in 1863.
The Union, notably. The U.S. Congress meaning the Union.
The Northern.
Yeah. They're in the Civil War at the point when it's approved.
1863, yeah.
Okay.
The U.S. Civil War is 1861, 1865.
Got it.
Yeah. It's kind of remarkable that in the middle of a Civil War, they could meet to be like, yeah, that would be good. West Virginia, welcome. And I would say, having been West Virginia's neighbor my entire life, it's a very interesting state.
Yeah, it seems like to have a strong sense of regional identity. Okay.
Yeah. So even after its statehood and to the end of the Civil War, it was a place of divided sympathies. Some people joining the Union during the Civil War and others supporting the Confederacy. There were more than 600 battles and engagements fought in West Virginia during the Civil War. Kanawha County itself, having voted against secession from the Union, is bordered by 5 counties that voted to join the Confederacy and 3 that didn't.
Okay, so it's at the meeting place, basically.
Yes.
Okay. So this other point that I want to kind of cover to set the stage here is this moment in American education and pop culture of the Scopes trial, which was decided in 1925. I think I remember reading about this in high school, probably.
Yeah.
American history textbooks. But this is a moment after which cultural and religious conservatism takes on a new kind of more defensive posture in American consciousness and media and stuff like that. So the Scopes trial formerly known as State of Tennessee versus John T. Scopes, was a legal case that originated in Dayton, Tennessee, not that far away from where we're talking about here. And I didn't know this until I looked it up, but it was partially a deliberate publicity stunt. It was designed to challenge the legality of Tennessee's Butler Act, which at the time prohibited the teaching of evolutionary theory in public schools. It used some pretty interesting language to do so. A local activist and a coal company manager decided to organize some folks and respond to an ad that was placed in regional papers from the ACLU. That organization was looking to recruit a teacher in Tennessee to intentionally contravene the Butler Act, break the law on purpose, so that they could have a court case as a test case to challenge measures that were restricting academic freedom. This activist, his name was George Rapalea, thought that the trial might serve to boost tourism and economic activity in this area of Tennessee, which was and had been for a while in economic and population decline. So kind of a weird way to get your city on the map, but okay. There's this really interesting tidbit from, this is a Britannica article on the Scopes trial. They said that, quote, hundreds of journalists covered the trial, which Chicago's WGN radio broadcast live at a cost of $1,000 a day, the first national broadcast of a live trial proceeding. So
interesting.
This is a circus in more ways than one. There's this writer, his name is H.L. Mencken. He's a prominent journalist, social critic. He wrote for the Baltimore Sun. He famously satirized the pro-Butler Act crowd. These tended to be kind of more conservative, fundamentalist, religious type people. He especially loved to pick on prominent politician, lawyer, and 3-time unsuccessful U.S. presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan, who was prosecuting the case in court on behalf of Tennessee. I wanted to just read this quote from Mencken's writings because it's brutal and it encapsulates the spirit of the times. Quote, during the whole time of its delivery, the old mountebank Bryan sat tight-lipped and unmoved. There is, of course, no reason why it should have shaken him. He has these hillbillies locked up in his pen and he knows it. His brand is on them. He is at home among them. Since his earliest days, indeed, his chief strength has been among the folk of remote hills and forlorn and lonely farms. Now, with his political aspirations all gone to pot, he turns to them for religious consolations. They understand his peculiar imbecilities. His nonsense is their ideal of sense. When he deluges them with his theologic bile, they rejoice like pilgrims disporting in the river Jordan. End quote.
That's a quote.
So, Scopes and Company lose this court case. Many people expected that to happen because of the general vibe of the court and people on it and what they were allowing as testimony and what they weren't. So they were pretty sure this was going to fail. Butler Act remained in effect until much later. It was repealed in 1967. But this spectacle of media circus around this event is seen to have influenced how people nationwide came to think of this fundamentalist camp. I think what comes out of that is a somewhat fair reaction to this kind of cultural elitism, or at least perceived cultural elitism. There's this frustration amongst folks who feel like their traditions are not even necessarily argued against, but just kind of like ignored and dismissed.
Which is kind of worse almost.
Yeah. Okay, now we're going to talk about Kanawha County, West Virginia. This is the home of the county seat and the state capital, Charleston. There's a pretty deep history of protest culture in Kanawha County. There are these strikes, the Paint Creek and Cabin strikes of 1921. In those events, after attempting to address working conditions, pay, and safety in West Virginia coal mines, the United Mine Workers of America began a wildcat strike. That's a strike that doesn't have the support of union leadership. No, you haven't been authorized to strike. And this work stoppage spread to other mining operations in Kanawha County. And then company guards started to force employees out of company housing. It became violent. There were like 13 months of back and forth struggles and 25 people were killed.
Yeah.
So there's this long tradition of, I mean, really kind of taking advantage of the land for its resources, but also taking advantage of the people who are extracting those resources.
Yeah. Before the 1974-1975 school year, there is some new guidance from West Virginia about what type of curriculum their schools should be embracing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a focus on multiculturalism. There's a school board meeting, and at that school board meeting, they moved to approve a new set of 325 textbooks that align with these new state guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
This is basically them just kind of catching up with the educational trends of the time. And so the school board meets to approve this new set of textbooks.
Okay. So where does this debate first kind of emerge?
They, on this board, is a woman named Alice Moore. She is a local pastor's wife. Alice Moore basically ended up on the school board for the sole purpose of removing a sex education program in the Kanawha County schools. And she was successful.
Yeah.
She also had concerns about the teaching of so-called dialectology, which is the idea that there's maybe multiple correct ways to speak. In her world, certain dialects would never be correct to her.
There are several.
And I'll give you a guess of what sort of dialect she's speaking about that would never be correct, but I don't think I need to. I think it's quite clear what Alice believes about the way people speak.
When you see the authors to whom she also objected, which included Malcolm X, James Baldwin, Eldridge Cleaver. So, yeah, I did want to just dwell for a moment on that, because there were several recordings of her from these school board meetings. She said there's a correct way to speak, and she goes out of her way to give some examples of what are not correct ways to speak, but she's like, there is a correct way to speak.
And it's the way that white people speak.
In this context, yes. But there's a way in which she's trying to say, look, we teach one another things here. We teach each other English because we feel it's important to communicate clearly. That is an argument that she makes. She's kind of trying to say, well, we don't want to be lazy. But that's not, unfortunately, what's actually going on with respect to dialects. It's not laziness that accounts for difference, and it's not inadequacy of one's linguistic tradition that accounts for those differences. But you don't know any of that unless you study language.
Or you meet enough people to hear how all kinds of people speak.
Well, yeah, I mean...
based on where they are. When your world is small.
When you experience language, too, yeah, I should say. Not just when you study it.
When your world is small, it remains small.
Yeah, but, okay, so, like, how do you help someone like this be like, well, what if there's more than one correct way? How do you bridge that gap?
To Alice? I'd like to leave her...
You're not going to bridge it? You're just going to leave her on the other side of the bridge?
I personally don't really think that Alice actually believes that to be true.
Okay, so you think that this is a shambolic argument that's covering up
I think from the beginning this was very obviously a concern of race.
Okay, well, she does have some other qualms.
Yeah, so something else that she hated was that they mentioned Sigmund Freud.
Yes.
And the Oedipus complex.
Yes.
And the theories surrounding it.
Very testy about that.
She couldn't imagine children reading that. Boys think about having sex with their mothers, and girls think about having sex with their fathers. And that's a horribly, horribly simplified way to boil it on Freud.
Freud does have some difficult and challenging and weird theories of psychology. I remember reading Freud for the first time in college and being like, excuse me, sir?
Yeah.
So, like, it's weird. It's off-putting. But mere exposure to that notion is somehow dangerous.
Right. For her.
Well, I don't know. Not just for her. I mean, for the children, right? So, like, kids thinking about these things is somehow, and I'm saying somehow because I don't actually understand the claim. How is being exposed to an idea that already exists in the world, whether you want it to or not, inherently dangerous?
She already got rid of the sex ed program. So to talk about Freud, you're going to have to acknowledge that people have sex. And these kids don't know that. So
True.
Freud is going to be truly shocking for them for so many reasons. No, I think that I'm just going to stay on this hill. I truly think that Alice Moore realized she had backed herself into a corner with some of her opinions on what was being taught. and then tried to expand it to include other things that she saw as like blasphemous learnings. And I say that because she and the others who ended up being wound up into this were quoted as saying that parts of these readings shouldn't be included, but they were quoting other parts of readings that were not included in the actual students' versions of the readings.
Okay, so they were taking from like Freud's book, but an excerpt that wasn't in the textbook?
Exactly.
Okay.
So one of her big things was about Malcolm X and about Eldridge Cleaver. Mm-hmm. Both of the things that had been mentioned specifically about Malcolm X and Eldridge Cleaver's writing was not in the text that the students were actually provided. When we were talking about the correctness of language, right, mm-hmm. and what it should sound like, I'm just going to go ahead and be the pot calling the kettle black here, but Appalachians don't have a lot of room to speak about what is correct in language and what is not. And as an Ohioan, it goes both ways across this river. Neither Ohioans nor West Virginians have a great grip of...
Well, I mean...
And so I will say that as someone who has lived in Ohio and who has been the brunt of these jokes and has made others the brunt of these jokes, the irony to me is I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it.
Alice Moore has a thick accent and a regional dialect.
Absolutely.
But
these are the same
others
types
would
of...
listen to her and consider her to be somewhere off on a spectrum of incorrect with respect to language.
And the same for when news reporters or whatever would come in the town to cover it, right? And things like that. Like, you could hear them othering people by their language.
Yeah, and there are more innocuous versions of this, too. Like, people regionally calling pop, soda, Coke, those things,
your buggies,
all the same.
Your carts.
It doesn't make any sense to say those things are either right or wrong.
You mean like your yard jimmies?
Yard jimmies,
which
if you will. Chipmunks, right?
Chipmunks.
We determined that's what that... Okay. So I guess my point is just like, if we accept that there are regional differences that are completely normal and fine to have, why do we accept that there are some...
that are not fine to have?
I would want her to answer that question sufficiently, and she kind of never does. Like, what is it that's caught up for you in this idea of correctness? And unfortunately, it ends up being this kind of cultural imperialism. The ability to say, I am right and you are wrong.
I am right for this place.
It's an in-group and out-group enforcement mechanism. Yeah. And I just want to ask Alice why she's doing that, why she's putting up that wall that comes with a certain formulation of correctness.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort that you're putting into getting an answer from her.
Well, it's because I don't think that these people should be merely just condescended to, because that's exactly what they are reacting against. Like,
I agree with that.
Alice Moore is reacting against a bunch of people who just show up and condescend to them and their way of life.
And unfortunately, I just had too much Alice Moore at this point to have any goodwill for her.
Okay.
But
all I'm saying
I
is...
agree with you.
I
do understand that.
If somebody in her camp, in her worldview, could explain to me what is at stake for you in enforcing this correctness, then I think I would understand better than I do now.
That's fair.
Why these attitudes persist and become conflict and become violent, because that's where this is going. So let's get back into it.
Okay.
The school board.
So eventually, what ends up happening is that the school board does approve the purchase of the books. And they have decided that they're going to move a small number of some of these titles that they believe to be a concern to a library. And in that place, then parents can opt their children in or out of that learning, essentially.
One of the parents, I can't remember if it was Alice Moore or somebody in that camp, got mad at the suggestion of opting their kids in and out, which because now then people want to have.
Right. Because they made a comment that we all know what happens to those kids when they do that. And they're going to be made fun of if they're opting out or whatever.
I'm like, it sounds like they're not.
Yeah.
But okay.
So in September of 1974, the school board withdrew all the books for a 30-day review period. And it was because of the level of violence that was occurring.
Yeah, all over the county.
So people reacted in a series of ways. Did they shoot at buses? They did.
With shotguns, I read.
And snipers.
Oh.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Were there mobs and firebombings and explosions at schools and at the school board building?
Yes.
There were.
Yes.
Did the Klan show up and hold a 4-hour rally? They did. Okay.
What does it mean when the Klan shows up to support your
It's not what you want.
Okay.
They said they didn't want the Klan there. But unfortunately, the Klan saw this and said, I know what this means.
Okay.
I've got a neat hat for this. And I know I'm being incredibly...
You have little patience for this.
I have so little patience. The Klan heard about this and then assembled enough Klan members from multiple states to come to Kanawha and hold a 4-hour plus rally over these books.
There's this article from the Village Voice called Holy War in West Virginia, A Fight Over America's Future by Paul Cowan.
This is a great article, by the way.
It is fascinating.
It is beautifully written.
It's a pretty lengthy article, and he does some really embedded journalism. Like, you can tell he's spending a lot of time with these people and trying to understand what's happening around him.
And he doesn't just see them as, like, caricatures of...
No.
Charleston or something like that. Like, he is, aware.
There's a point at which he described exchanges of gunfire, schoolrooms were dynamited, school buses shot at, cars and homes firebombed. One night, someone put 15 sticks of dynamite under Charleston's Board of Education building and demolished part of it.
Also, I would like to mention that when things were at their iffiest, as far as violence goes, Alice Moore got out. She fled. She wasn't even there.
Yes, the scariness has some ringleaders. There's a local pastor. His name is Reverend Marvin Horan. This guy becomes something of an opposition leader, rallying the anti-textbook crowd. He sets up this office or headquarters in Campbell's Creek, West Virginia. At some point, Campbell's Creek Elementary School is bombed with sticks of dynamite. Got tossed into classrooms early one morning before school started. Teachers who did choose to use these textbooks were often targeted by these groups. Rocks were thrown at their homes and homes were firebombed. When the West Virginia Department of Education encouraged compromise at one point, Horan rallied folks to push back and not stop until all of the board members had been relieved of duty and the books were completely removed from schools. And Horan was later tried and found guilty of plotting several of these bombings.
Surprise.
And then there's this joining on from the labor movement. So there are thousands of coal miners, bus drivers, other workers in the area that stopped work in mass protest. Parents were boycotting schools. They kept home about 20% of elementary school students. And students who did come to school were sometimes picketed and derided, and again, rocks were thrown at them. This all kind of culminated. There's a subsequent school board meeting where a fist fight breaks out.
There's an incredible audio account that you can hear part of it.
Yes, there's an American Radio Works radio documentary about this called The Great Textbook War. Great audio clips from there. You can hear the people yelling.
You can hear the scuffle.
Meeting. Yes.
It was amazing.
There are eyewitness accounts from the day that fight broke out. They were saying that there were like people up in front in the crowd that they didn't recognize who were kind of like looking pretty menacing, and they just sort of pounced and all hell broke loose. You were mentioning at the beginning of this, the outside agitators are the ones who kind of showed up to fuel a lot of this conflict that might not have otherwise unfolded the way that it did.
The news spread really quickly, of course, about what's happening in Charleston, West Virginia. As we mentioned earlier, the KKK got involved with this. Mm-hmm. They supported those that were fighting against the books being used in the classroom, and they even went as far as to provide support for legal funding. Many of the people who were loudest in removing the books were not people from the county. Mm. The National Education Association did an inquiry report in February of 1975 about the textbook wars, and here's a quote from that report. A more recent entrant into the Kanawha County protest has been the Ku Klux Klan, whose imperial wizard, James R. Venable, has charged that the objectionable books are part of a communist plot. As this report was being written, an announcement had been made that a group of Klansmen from 5 or 6 states would conduct an investigation of the controversy in order to, quote, expose those textbooks. The report is listed in the show notes. It's a really interesting read if you have an interest in actually finding out more about this. But this is what I was talking about. Like when the KKK arrives, it's not indicative of their community. It's indicative of people of multiple other states that are seeing this as their chance to jump in. And the NEA in that same report said that had these outside groups not been such a loud, focused factor of it, this would have never grown to the size that it did.
And the media spectacle element.
Not only was local news covering it, but they even had the New Yorker covered it quite a few times. 60 Minutes featured it, and the Village Voice, as we previously shared. There are so many things that come from this period of violence. This community is still kind of, I think, reckoning with in some ways. I mean, the people that I read in articles and things, it's a part of their day-to-day. One of the people flat out said that it was probably the most important thing that had happened in their life. There's like this sense of almost being stuck in time. I think we forgot to mention something.
Okay.
What do you do when you actually disagree with your school board in something that's being taught in schools?
What do you mean?
Like, what should someone do? Should we bring in
violent mobs? I don't think that's probably the answer.
And maybe how we should have approached this episode was to say, here's what to do if you're unhappy with something. Well, here are a lot of healthier ways to deal with concerns you may or may not have about the education that your child is receiving.
I do think that this story gets at a lot of questions about what makes democratic governance and representative governance possible, and what happens when it breaks down.
Yeah.
I think that having a positive vision of what you think should be happening is better than reacting negatively to things you don't like. I think it's really hard for people to define a positive vision of what education looks like in the absence of exposure to a wide variety of thoughts and philosophies and opinions and all of these things. So that's the struggle. I don't know that this is, for me, a question of did they have the right reaction. I think this is, for me, a question of what does fundamentalism make you think about the world in which you live and, like, the place of education in it. I would just say, like, our towns where we grew up, both of us are, like, in places that are predominantly white Christian. So this gets down to how holy texts and scriptures are taught. And for a certain sort of religious person, because of how the Bible, in this case, is taught, it's a sin to be in a posture of questioning. This way of encountering and learning about the world counts on you unquestioningly accepting certain things. Questions are in and of themselves standing against authority.
Yeah. I also think something that struck me as interesting, one of the issues that people had with Malcolm X's writing was about his statements on Christianity. That was one of the things that was pulled a few times.
Yeah.
And
he was like, I'm glad I'm not a something Christian. I can't remember exactly what he said, but yeah.
And I think it's really
brainwashed. I think he said brainwashed Christian.
And I just think it's really interesting that at no point was the separation of church and state mentioned as part of the reason to read someone like Malcolm X or, whoever else it was applied to. Because at that point, then you know that they're afraid of outside voices.
At some point, somebody objected strongly because one of the textbooks were asking children to think about, is it ever okay to lie?
Yes.
And the other one was something like, is it ever okay to disobey your parents or something like that? Even just asking the question
is a threat.
Asking the question means that a thought can enter your head that I can disobey my parents. But like the thing that's weird about that is that those thoughts are entering your head anyway. If you're a child, you're 100% thinking about disobeying your parents from time to time, whether or not you read a book.
Not if I didn't read it. I won't.
Argument that I would make there is like, why not learn about this in the company of trusted, trained, professional educators and other students in a sort of safe conversational space to explore ethical impacts of things.
Well, and there were teachers and parents who spoke out in support of not making their world smaller. One of the parents, this was in the audio recording, he appealed to the school board basically to say that he was not worried because he trusted his parenting and that he believed that they had established such a strong foundation for their children's morals, beliefs, right, codes of whatever, that even reading it wasn't going to be dangerous because they trusted in what they had taught them and they trusted in their kid and they trusted it. And I think that was such a great moment to be like, no, like, let's put this on our kids. Let's trust what we've done. Let's trust what we believe.
Yeah, but that comes down to the fundamental disagreement, because you're saying what we trust in those situations should be our own reason. Our own reason, which is a product of our education, our parenting, all of this kinds of thing. But we trust our internal calculation that determines what is right and wrong. But that's in opposition to a worldview that says, no, what is right and wrong is defined in these words, in this book, and that's it. So you're substituting a new mechanism for determining right and wrong in that case, and that's what can't be abided. The argument is one between fundamentalism that says this is always the right answer no matter what, and other points of view that say you're allowed to ask whether this is always the right point of view or not.
I just also think that there's something to be said for trusting that if your kid is in a conversation where, like, when do you lie to your parents or whatever, like, I feel like there has to be some trust from parents in some way with their kids to believe that they're capable of handling information that maybe does not jive with what they're taught at home, or maybe does not jive with what they personally believe that others believe, and that's okay. There are all kinds of people living their life in all kinds of ways that they see as fit for them, and that they're not knocking on their neighbor's door or throwing stones at them because they don't live identical.
Right, but there are stakes, but there are like stakes, immortal soul stakes to this question. Because you're saying it's nice we can just believe different things and coexist, but this point of view says that puts you in danger, actually. If I'm one of these parents who is objecting to these textbooks, I think that this represents a threat to me and to my family.
Yeah.
Because not only is there, to use Alice Moore's terminology, a correct way of thinking, but that correct way of thinking is also the key to my eternal salvation.
Sure. I think I was trying to apply it to other types of learning that weren't just Christian beliefs based, but yeah, if you're right.
Oh, I know, sure. But I guess I'm just saying it all for these people. It all comes back to, can you resolve that question?
Yeah, they didn't like that one of the activities was to like read a myth and then talk about connections to a story from the Bible. That really bugged them, which I thought was
to see the Bible as a mythological text,
to compare it to a mythological text.
And this is even true of people on some side of this argument. You can still have that be your book and your religion and not think of it this way. So like you don't.
Yeah, there could be just no danger.
Yes,
too,
and there were plenty of people in this textbook war who were of this position. But like you can be a Christian and believe in your holy text in a way that also permits it to be questioned. So circling back to you and your classroom here, what exactly is your pedagogical relationship to this idea of correctness? Alice Moore's objection as a teacher, how do you deal with this? Because there are times when you're just like, I'm just teaching you the right way of doing something.
Sure.
Do you kind of have to have a foot in both worlds where you're like, yes, I accept correctness, and I also accept that correctness is a made up thing?
Yeah. I see it as like there's fact and then there's correct. And I think that those are different.
What is that? Fact and correct. What does that mean?
There are some things that are not disputable, and those are facts. 2 + 2 is 4. That is a fact.
Okay.
Correct is a set of beliefs, a set of values, a set of expectations.
A demeanor, a social attitude,
sure.
a set of norms and morals.
And those are not fact to me.
Values.
In the same way.
Uh-huh.
I think that's just where I see the difference is like, you know, there are things that my students do that are correct, and there are things that they do that are incorrect, but that doesn't mean they're factually wrong or something like that. But I'm also thinking like behaviors and things like that too. Mm-hmm. Like it's a lot more than just
the rules of grammar.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know, and this is something that I've had to deal with a lot teaching English. I try to remind myself that art for art's sake exists, and that sometimes a book is a book, and that sometimes a sentence is a sentence, and that we don't have to be looking for something else in everything we read. I have to be more and more willing to be open to students' interpretations than my own. Because them getting what I got out of the book isn't actually the point, right? Them getting what they get based on their own experiences, lives, expectations, beliefs, thoughts is way more valuable learning.
I think that question can vary based on what you're teaching.
I think so too. And that's why I stated everything as an English teacher, because I do think that in my world, it's quite different.
You're speaking to how to develop interpretive mechanisms.
Yeah. And I mean, I am also someone that has been taught a lot of books in a certain way about a certain thing where I was told this is what it's about. And then someday when I grew up and I started to do it on my own, I was like, whoa, I missed this. And it was because that wasn't the way it was being taught, or that wasn't the focus, or that wasn't the unit goal, or whatever. And so...
Or the teacher didn't care about that.
Or the teacher didn't read it that way, right? Like, that could just be a factor, too, is like the teacher just didn't read it the way that I did. And so I think as an English...
teacher has a different life experience that they bring to bear on this text or whatever.
There's always the joke of like, oh, but why is the wall red? And it's like, you know, maybe the wall's red because it's covered in blood, or because they're angry, or they're a Buckeye fan. That's like how we have trained. And I guess also, like, when you just think about correctness, like, is there only one correct way to read The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe? No. And Poe wouldn't have said that there was, because Poe was going through too many things to be like, this is only one lens of this thing. And so I just try to think, you know, I don't want to be limiting. Sometimes when you're limiting, it gets boiled down to correct or not. And I don't want that to be the case in my classroom. I want it to be true that my kids could read it this way or that way.
I think it can be the case that the stakes on this feel high because with respect to fundamentalism or the kind of religious persuasion of Alice Moore, being incorrect means you're on the outside. You're not of us. So I think there's also, you know, this antecedent shame that comes with being incorrect. So it can be a really powerful kind of social enforcement mechanism. And I understand not wanting your children to be on the wrong side of that enforcement mechanism.
Mm. Like, that's something that is absent from this entire conversation. Alice Moore's kids couldn't have had an easy time. These other people's children could not have had an easy time during this. And I think that in all of this outrage, they're totally absent. Mm-hmm. In doing the research, you know, I heard from people who are now grown-ups talking about what it was like when they were 12 and things like that. But they are remarkably absent from the conversations. And not that I truly believe that every 12-year-old should get to have a say in their educational requirements from the state. Let me be clear. I think they're noticeably absent. Mm-hmm. The world that their parents were fighting for was smaller and darker and scarier on those days.
As a public school educator, you are asked to, by default, teach people with whom you disagree all the time, whether it be religiously, ethically, in terms of values, culture, all these kinds of things. Not even disagree or just like don't share elements of those things. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to reach those people. It's kind of familiar from our conversation about culturally responsive pedagogy. You can meet your students much better if you can at least recognize and sort of accept basic points of difference. Mm-hmm.
The one thought that I did keep having was, and I mentioned how the students were remarkably absent from this whole thing, but also trying to imagine what resuming school year would look like and what it felt like to be the child of the people who had committed an act of violence or crime or whatever, and how hard that would have been for them to deal with the decisions of their adults in their lives. And I'm sad that that was probably a year lost. And I'm sad that this place has such a single history.
Yep, because you only get these little glimpses into people's lives when these flashpoint events happen.
Like, and whose perspective and whose voice and things like that come into play. This is the part of the episode where we tell you something fun we've learned recently.
Do you want to go first?
You go first.
Okay. I learned about this place called Speaker's Corner. There are actually multiple places, but there's one very famous one. It's a place dedicated to the public exercise of speech. The most famous and probably the original one, according to my very quick Googling, is in Hyde Park, London. It's been active since an 1872 Act of Parliament that set aside the northeast edge of Hyde Park for public demonstrating, and the article I was reading said that's where protests ended up terminating a lot of times, so there was a lot of public meeting happening there anyway. But this is a place where suffragists met. Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, George Orwell were frequenters of this corner. Orwell once wrote of the Hyde Park corner that he saw, quote, Indian nationalists, temperance reformers, communists, Trotskyists, the Socialist Party of Great Britain, the Catholic Evidence Society, free thinkers, vegetarians, Mormons, the Salvation Army, the Church Army, and a large variety of plain lunatics, end quote. An important part of British political culture, according to this article in Atlas Obscura. We will link to that. So that's what I learned about Speaker's Corner.
That's really interesting because I'm teaching 1984 right now.
Yeah.
And there's I think it's called the Chestnut Tree Cafe. And it's where ousted party members and artists and free thinkers go to talk. And it's a place where you can speak more freely.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What'd you learn about?
I am going to jump continents.
Okay.
This explorer, Kathleen Martinez, and her team recently discovered the sunken ruins of a port that was active during the time of Cleopatra. She has been exploring parts of Egypt that are not as heavily researched and studied, because she is ultimately on a quest to find Cleopatra herself.
The tomb of Cleopatra?
Yes.
Okay.
I watched a TikTok, I read an article, I included the article in the show notes, and then last night we watched the National Geographic documentary about Kathleen Martinez and this discovery, and it was amazing. The team that she assembled, the technology used, the ways that they're able to carbon date or otherwise note ages of things. And not to go deep diving into this, but most incredibly is that obviously because it was part of a port, they are doing all of this underwater. Mm-hmm. So not only are there Egyptologists and things like that who are digging under tombs and whatever else, but then on top of that, now they have expanded into working literally in the ocean. So one of her teammates, Kathleen Martinez's teammates, his first discovery was the Titanic. Casual.
Oh, okay.
He has now also found part of a port where there are coins dating back to the time of Cleopatra. And there are tunnels underground leading to this port and out of it and things like that. So
wow,
it's very, very cool.
Cool stuff.
Very, very cool.
Got anything else for us?
That's all.
All right. We'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
See ya.
Bye. Hello, listeners, and thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of 16 to 1. This show is produced by a two-woman team, your co-hosts Katie Day, our lead researcher and social media manager, and Chelsea Adams, that's me. I edit and produce the show, and I also make the music you hear in our episodes. Please consider subscribing to the show or recommending it to a friend or colleague. We love word-of-mouth support. Visit our website at 16to1.com for show notes and resources, or to get in touch with us. 16 to 1 is sponsored by Moonbeam Multimedia, a firm that partners with civic innovators, educators, and mission-driven organizations to help create stronger communities.
When are the robots going to come for this job and do our podcast for us?
They already are.
As us. It could just be me and say it.
We already have slop casts.
Honestly, I'm into it. It sounds nice.
Infinite algorithmic slop.
My brain is slop.
Honestly, why do we even need teachers anymore? We have infinite algorithmic slop that we can make them watch.
Honestly. Just take me back and shoot me.